Welcome to Mercenary Media. Stop chewing on your crayons, recruits, and pay attention. Out here, we deal in stories carved from steel, smoke, and battlefield scars. Tales of bounty hunters, ghosts from the Black Ops shadows, lost cities, and the monsters that walk between neon and ash. If you're here for something soft, you took a wrong turn. But if you want high-intensity storytelling, tactical world-building, and characters who survive on grit, instinct, and bad decisions, then fall in line. And one more thing. These videos may contain graphic descriptions of violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Now tighten your gear, square your stance. This transmission is live.
The city never really sleeps. It just changes the kind of noise it makes. By the time I left the bounty kiosk after turning in Dalen Core, Avalon's lower districts were moving from the night shift into something even worse. The bars and dens shut their front shutters and opened their back doors. The legitimate workers vanish into stacked dorms, and the people who never had a legitimate job to begin with crawl out of the cracks. I walked. I don't own transport. I don't rent it either. Walking keeps you honest about distance, about effort, about risk. The smog burned my lungs, that familiar mix of industrial exhaust, cheap synth smoke, and the chemical rot of too many people stacked into too little space. Neon struggled to stay bright on flickering signs overhead. The pavement shone with oil and old rain. The holoband on my wrist was quiet for a while. It always goes quiet after a successful turn-in, like the system is pretending to give you a moment to breathe before it tightens the leash again. I lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then it buzzed. A sharp pulse. Priority. I stopped in the shadow of a dead vending machine and lifted my arm. The interface blinked awake, painting my face in pale blue light. New contract. Primary target, Jensen Varr. Occupation, smuggler, mechanic, systems diverter. Special tag, repeated surveillance evasion. Details, operates in and around the mid-sector scrap corridors. Known for traps. Known associate of illegal weapons rings. Contract type, alive delivery. Reward, 115,000 credits. Not huge, not small, enough to matter, enough to keep ammo in my mags and filters in my mask. Before I could close it, another alert slid across the holo. Tier L7 high priority mark, Lysander Hale. Status, active. Last confirmed sighting, mid-district within 3 kilometers of the scrap corridors. Risk level, maximum. Notice, hunters are strongly advised to avoid direct confrontation while on other contracts. An L7 warning carries more weight than most laws. It's the system's way of saying, if you go chasing this thing out of turn, don't expect anyone to get your body back. The image of Hale's file photo lingered on the display for a moment. It didn't do him justice. No static image could ever capture how he moved, how he watched. I dismissed the interface and started walking again. Core's credits had barely had time to settle in my account. My muscles still ached from the fight in the foundry compound, still remembered the impact of the riot baton, the flare of gunfire around us, the sight of Hale watching from above as I dragged Core out. He'd let me go. That bothered me more than if he'd taken a shot. Men like Hale don't waste movement. If he let something happen, it's because he wanted to know what came next. Fine. What came next was Jensen Varr, the scrap corridors, and one more notch paid off on the board. I cut through a side alley to avoid a group of factory men arguing in the street. Their shouts bounced off the walls, all steam and bad pay and worse options. None of it had anything to do with me. Hunters don't get involved. They get paid. I passed a wall with bounty posters plastered over each other in layers, printed sheets stapled over glowing digital boards, old faces half covered by newer ones, red X's sprayed across completed contracts. Somewhere among them, if you dug deep enough, would be the first time my name ever showed up in someone else's file, back before I knew the rules well enough to stay off boards I didn't choose. I didn't dig. The scrap corridors waded to the south, in the part of the city where the skyline dipped and turned jagged with piles of discarded machine parts, collapsed service gantries, and the skeletons of old transports stripped down to their frames. The closer I got, the more the smell changed, from people and chemicals to metal and dust. The official perimeter fence was a joke. Razor mesh torn in a dozen places, patched badly in 10, left hanging in 2. The city claimed no one was supposed to be in there without clearance. The city also claimed to monitor these zones. They didn't. People like Jensen survived by living in the gaps between what the city said it was and what it really was. I found a sagging section of mesh where someone had propped it up with a broken antenna mast. I lifted it, slipped under, and dropped into the corridors. The sound cut instantly. Out in the streets, noise echoed in layers. Voices, traffic, distant machinery. In here, sound became focused. Every creak of metal, every loose bolt sliding down a slope, every drip of oily water from above. My visor switched to low light and contrast enhancement automatically. The world became outlines of stacked shapes, engine blocks, twisted beams, hollow turbines, old mining exosuits piled like dead insects. If Jensen Varr had built a nest anywhere, it would be in here. I moved forward, shoes whispering over a mix of grit and small metal fragments. You can't walk silently on scrap, but you can walk quietly enough to not be obvious. Old industrial corridors had a logic to them. Even when you couldn't see the original building beneath the junk, you could feel where the main passages once were. People tend to follow the same routes, even when they don't know why. Smugglers and scavengers carved their paths through these graveyards of machines the same way water carves through rock. I picked up a trail. Scuffed footprints in dust on a beam that shouldn't have been walked on. A handprint smeared on a relatively clean panel. A dropped cigarette butt still half intact. Recent. Good. After 50 meters or so, I heard voices. I flattened myself against a towering wall of broken plating and listened. I'm telling you, Varr doesn't want to move. He thinks the corridors are still safe. He thinks a lot of things. He thought core was untouchable too, remember? Then a hunter walked into the foundry and walked back out with him. A pause. Yeah, Mercer. I heard the name. My jaw tightened. I heard the ghost was sighted there too? Hale, L7 mark? You know what that means. I've heard the stories, the young man said quietly. No, you've heard the rumors. The truth is worse. They were sitting near a small fire burning in the hollow of an old engine casing. I could see them now from the corner of my visor. 2 silhouettes, both armed with cheap rifles, both wearing patchwork armor that saw better days. I could work around them. Killing them would be easy, unnecessary, sloppy. I waited for the right moment. When the younger man stood to warm his hands, when the older one turned to adjust something behind him, and slipped past them in their blind spot, staying pressed to the shadows where the junk piles leaned overhead. They never saw me. I pushed deeper. The corridors weren't really corridors in the traditional sense. They were trenches between towers of scrap that had slowly been hollowed out and repurposed, layer by layer. Tunnels bored through old machines, catwalks stitched between beams, cables dangling like dead vines. Jensen's file warned about mechanical traps and remote-activated defensive measures. That's the sort of phrase bureaucrats use when they don't know how to describe something they don't understand. I understood it just fine. My visor flashed a proximity warning. I stopped. There was a tension in the floor, too regular for it to be natural. The pattern of the plating was wrong. Someone had laid a new panel over something else. I crouched, looking closer. A seam where there shouldn't be one. Scratches on the surface from boots that had stepped carefully around it instead of over it. Pressure plate. I picked up a small chunk of metal and tossed it on the suspicious panel. The piece hit, bounced once. The plate dropped an inch. A heartbeat later, the wall to my right detonated outward. A blast of shrapnel, rusted bolts, sharpened scraps, bits of glass and twisted wire erupted in a narrow cone exactly at chest height where a human torso would have been if I had walked that line. Shards tore through the space in front of me. A few pinged off my armor. One grazed my shoulder, drawing a thin line of heat and pain. Then silence again. I checked my shoulder. Blood. Shallow cut. Nothing that would slow me down for more than a few minutes. Cute, I muttered. Jensen was
Smart enough to build traps that maimed or killed. Smart enough to know how hunters think. Not smart enough to realize someone trained like I was had seen worse. I adjusted my path forward and kept moving. The second trap came quicker. This one was wired to a trip line stretched ankle-high across a narrow choke point between two massive gear wheels. The line was almost invisible, thin monofilament that barely existed in the light, but my visor caught the reflection. I didn't bother to test it. I stepped over, careful to keep Core's cut on my shoulder from brushing anything. As I moved past the choke point, I heard a faint whir above. I dove forward. A rusted crane hook swung through the space where my head had just been, heavy enough that, if it connected, I'd be in no condition to finish any contract ever again. The hook crashed into one of the gear wheels, sending a shower of flakes down into the narrow passage. I lay there for a second, listening to my own breath, feeling my pulse in my throat. Jensen's paranoia was thorough. I'd give him that. I adjusted my path forward and kept moving. The second trap came quicker. This one was wired to a trip line stretched ankle-high across a narrow choke point between two massive gear wheels. The line was almost invisible, thin monofilament that barely existed in the light, but my visor caught the reflection. I didn't bother to test it. I stepped over, careful to keep Core's cut on my shoulder from brushing anything. As I moved past the choke point, I heard a faint whir above. I dove forward. A rusted crane hook swung through the space where my head had just been, heavy enough that, if it connected, I'd be in no condition to finish any contract ever again. The hook crashed into one of the gear wheels, sending a shower of flakes down into the narrow passage. I lay there for a second, listening to my own breath, feeling my pulse in my throat. Jensen's paranoia was thorough. I'd give him that. I adjusted my path forward and kept moving. After the third trap, a narrow corridor whose floor suddenly gave way to a pit full of steel spikes.
which I only avoided by catching the lip with my fingertips and hauling myself back up, I revised my internal assessment of Jensen Varr. Not just clever, obsessive, possibly terrified. Men don't build gauntlets like this unless they truly believe something worse than a standard hunter is coming for them. Something like Lysander Hale. More than once I almost turned around, not because I couldn't handle it, but because the trap layouts started to feel like a puzzle designed to move intruders along a specific route, to herd them. If Hale had touched Jensen's world, it made sense. Ghost tactics sometimes exploited fear constructs like this. Trap mazes meant to drive a target exactly where you wanted them. But I wasn't the target. Not today. Another 50 meters in, the scrap walls tightened and curved inward, forming something like ribs above me. The air grew hotter. A faint humming sounded up ahead, mechanical, high-pitched, drones. I slowed and listened. A faint clicking. Rotors. The uneven whine of old motors. I slid along the wall and eased to the edge of a larger opening. Inside, I saw them. 3 repurposed industrial inspection drones built from mismatched parts, hovering on shaky stabilizers. Their camera clusters had been swapped for cheap barrel flashers. They weren't strong enough to kill, but they could stun, blind, alert others. Jensen had wired their sensors to a perimeter grid. Any motion in their field would ping him. A direct approach would be an announcement. I traced their patrol pattern. They moved in a lazy triangle, maintaining a central zone of overlap that never stayed in one place. I waited, heart steady, breath controlled. When 2 drones crossed each other, creating a momentary blind spot between them, I rolled across open ground to the shadow of an overturned cargo pod, keeping my body profile low. My shoulder brushed the floor. The cut from the earlier shrapnel burned. I didn't make a sound. From the new position, I was within arm's reach of one of the drone's pass paths. I stripped a piece of flexible cabling from the pod frame, looped it around my finger, and waited again. The drone drifted closer. I snapped the cable loop upward, hooking its stabilizer arm and yanking it down. Before it could blare an alarm, I slammed it into the ground and ripped its power lead free. The other 2 glitched, recalibrating, confused. I broke the dead drone open, pulled a small capacitor out, and tossed it across the room. It hit the far wall and rolled. The remaining drones spun toward the sound, recalibrated, and drifted after it to investigate. I moved the other way. Behind their patrol area, another passage bored into the scrap, a tunnel darker than the rest, edges sharpened by hand-cut metal rather than the chaotic collapse of time. Jensen's home. I stepped inside. The tunnel narrowed in places to barely shoulder width. The walls felt close, oppressive. Every sound I made came back to me twice, once from each side. My visor picked up a faint heat source ahead. A single figure. Stationary. Then a second ping. Another presence. This one behind me. That's when I heard it. My name. Mercer. The voice was quiet, too quiet for the distance the visor indicated. It didn't come from in front of me. It came from the side. From everywhere. Ghost training teaches you a lot of things. including how to identify audio patterns. This one had a distortion you only got when sound bounced off multiple surfaces in a confined space. Whoever spoke knew how to place their voice. I didn't turn around. "Busy," I said. A faint chuckle. "I can see that," Hale's voice replied. He was using the tunnels like an echo chamber, standing somewhere networked into this warren, letting his voice bleed through the metal. "You take Core, now one of Core's data rats. You're building a pattern. They'll start asking questions." I said, "They can ask whatever they want. I just finish contracts." "Do you?" he asked softly. "Or do you pick contracts that lead in one direction?" I ignored him and kept walking. "You know where this trail goes," Hale said. "You're not stupid. So why pretend you only care about credits?" The tunnel turned a corner. Light flickered ahead. Soft, orange, firelight. Jensen's heat source glowed slightly brighter on my visor. "Because credits keep my filters fresh," I replied. "Talking doesn't." The echo faded. Hale didn't answer. He could have been standing 1 meter behind me or 30 away. I couldn't afford to care. Primary target first. Everything else later. I stepped around the final curve. Jensen Varr's den looked exactly like what you'd expect from a man who treated junk like shelter and fear like oxygen. It was a pocket carved into the scrap piles, some 10 meters across, partially roofed by overlapping panels of metal. A small fire burned in a drum in the middle. Screens made from salvaged terminals were bolted to one wall, showing grainy feeds from half a dozen cameras wired somewhere deeper in the corridors. Cables ran everywhere. Tools lay scattered in fragile piles. A cot in the corner held a mess of blankets, food packets, and a small pistol that probably jammed 3 years ago. Jensen
Stood near the monitors. Wiry frame, grease-stained jacket, eyes bloodshot and wild from sleep deprivation. He looked up. His gaze locked onto my visor. He knew instantly who I was. Not by face, by posture, by the way I filled the doorway. Hunters have a certain signature. "Mercer," he whispered. "They said you were coming." I stepped inside, keeping my hands loose and at my sides. "You know why I'm here," I said. "You're here for credits," he snapped. "Nothing else." "That's right. You think I'm worse than the people who buy, the people who fire, the people who sit in clean towers and send weapons down here?" His voice shook. "You think I'm the problem?" "I don't think about it. You've got a contract. I'm here to fulfill it. That's all." "Liar," Jensen spat. "You were at the foundry. Hale saw you. He told me." That grabbed my attention. "He told you what exactly?" I asked. "That you'd come," Jensen said, backing away toward the cot, toward the jammed pistol. "That you'd keep dismantling the chain from the ends, one link at a time. He said you don't know how to stop once you start something." "He's not wrong," I said. "I'm not going with you," Jensen said. "He said if I leave this nest, I die. If I stay, maybe I live." "He's using you," I said. "He's using your traps, your drones, your cameras. He's already planning what to do once I walk away with you or your body. You know that, right?" Jensen's hand twitched toward the pistol. "I wouldn't," I said. He grabbed it. I moved. He barely had time to raise the gun. I caught his wrist, twisted it sideways, the weapon clattered to the floor. He tried to punch me with his free hand. It connected with my chest plate, which hurt him more than me. I swept his legs with a low kick. He went down hard, back hitting the metal floor. I followed, pinning one arm to the ground with my knee while my hand found a restraint line on my belt. He struggled, short, panicked movements, nothing like the enforcer from the foundry. No training, just desperation. "I'm not going," he gasped. "I am," I said. I cinched the restraints around his wrists, pulling them tight behind his back. The fire in the drum popped. On one of the monitors, a camera feed showed a corner of the corridors. Empty, dark. Then a faint movement, a silhouette just at the edge of visible range. Tall, still, watching. Hale. I stared at that screen for a moment. He didn't move closer, didn't approach Jensen's den, didn't interfere. He was just there, measuring. "Please," Jensen whispered. Sweat had slicked his hair to his forehead. "He said if I tried to run, he'd make it slow. He's not here now. I am. And I don't get paid extra for slow." I hauled him to his feet. He could barely stand at first. His knees trembled like a deer's. I half-dragged him out of the den and back into the tunnel. The walk out took much longer than the walk in. Partly because moving with a bound prisoner slows you down, partly because I had to navigate the traps in reverse, and partly because I knew, with the kind of certainty that sits in the bones, that we weren't alone. Every time I glanced back, I saw nothing but scrap and shadow. Every time I listened for footsteps, other than my own and Jensen's shuffling, I heard only the complaining creak of metal settling and the distant whine of the city. But my instincts kept prickling. Once, near the crushed spike pit, I thought I heard breathing behind me. I turned. Nothing. Once, passing under the crane hook, I heard the softest tap on metal above, like a fingertip testing weight. I didn't look up. Jensen stumbled over a buried cable. I yanked him upright. "Keep moving," I said. "He's following us," Jensen whimpered. "Like he's in my head." "He's not the one you should be worrying about right now." "What, you?" Jensen barked out a weak laugh. "You're just efficient. He's something else." "Good to know I don't scare you as much," I said. "You do," Jensen said, "just in a different way." That was new. Not useful, not relevant. Still new. We reached the drone chamber. The two remaining drones drifted near the far wall, their pattern broken by the missing third. One beeped softly, scanning the room, then returned to its idle loop. I moved slow. Jensen moved slower. The drone's sensors skimmed over us but didn't react. Their programming recognized the signatures from before as non-event. Not bright enough to adapt, not dumb enough to ignore. We slipped past. At the corridor with the trip line, I pulled Jensen back before he could walk straight into it. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "Keeping you alive," I said. "You're worth more that way." He swallowed and stepped where I stepped, carefully avoiding the invisible line. At the pressure plate, I shoved him against the wall and guided his boots around the danger zone. We made it back to the outer edge of the corridors, just as the smog outside began to lighten a shade with the onset of dawn. In Avalon, dawn doesn't bring blue sky. It brings a slightly less toxic color of gray. The air beyond the scrap piles felt open, too open. Still, I didn't let go of Jensen's restraints until we were through the fence and back onto cracked pavement. He shivered, as if leaving that twisted nest of metal had stripped him of armor he didn't know he'd been wearing. Where are we going now?" he asked. "Bounty kiosk." Can't Can't you just say you didn't find me? I'll disappear, fade out. You'll never hear my name again." "That's not how this works," I said. "How does it work then?" he demanded. "What do they do to people you drop off?" "I don't ask." "Liar," he said again. "You're supposed to be good at reading people. Read me. I won't last a week in whatever cage they've got waiting." "Then you should have thought about that before you started ripping data cores and arming the kinds of people I'm paid to bring back." We walked. The route from the corridors to the kiosk took me through a territory that felt like the city's version of purgatory. Not quite industrial, not quite residential. Forgotten blocks of storage units, shuttered shops, half-functional power substations. The only people out at this hour were the ones carrying packages they didn't want daylight on. More than a few clocked me and changed direction when they saw Jensen in restraints. Hunters aren't officially law. We're worse. We work for whoever pays enough. By the time we reached the kiosk, the sky had shifted fully to its daytime gray, and the distant hum of transit lines could be heard overhead. The kiosk clerk was the same woman from Core's drop. Mechanical eye, terminal boredom, mug of synth coffee that smelled like burning rubber. She glanced up as we approached, then down at Jensen. Didn't think he'd ever come out of that metal graveyard. Contract said alive. I do my best. She tapped a key, and a scan field activated in front of the counter. "Drop him here." I nudged Jensen forward. He looked at the scan field like it was a guillotine. "It's just a scanner," I said. "It's never just anything," he replied, but stepped in regardless. The field swept over him, humming softly. Target ID, Jensen Varr. Status, alive. Delivery, confirmed. Processing, bounty, payment. The clerk skimmed the details on her inner display, then nodded. Payment transferred. 115,000 credits to account Mercer K. Another happy customer. Jensen turned his head slowly toward me. His eyes were something between hatred and pleading. "I hope," he said, voice hollow, "one day you find yourself on the wrong end of that scan." Wouldn't be the first time someone wanted that. They led him away, deeper into the secured section behind the kiosk. Doors closed, locks engaged. That was the end of Jensen Varr, as far as my part of the story was concerned. The clerk took another sip of her coffee and looked me over. "You know," she said, "the chatterboards are lighting up about that L7 ghost, Hale. They say he's been seen near 2 of your last drops." "Coincidence," I said. "You don't really believe that." I didn't answer. She tilted her head. "You got any contracts lined up on him yet?" "None posted publicly," I said. "Won't stay that way," she murmured. "With what he used to be, and now with him back sniffing around smugglers, ghosting through compounds." She shrugged. "When that contract drops..."
It's going to be insane. Syndicates, cores, rogue factions, everyone's going to want a piece. Be interesting to see if any hunter's stupid enough to take it. I've done stupid things for less, I said. She snorted. Yeah, she said, but there's stupid, and then there's L7 stupid. Today, you chose the smart contract. Jensen was, relatively simple. Relatively, I echoed. I turned away from the kiosk and started walking. Behind me, the city woke up more fully. Generators growled louder. Distant trains screamed on their rails. Doors opened. Arguments started. In front of me, the road stretched through a district that still felt like it hadn't decided what it wanted to be. I lifted my wrist and checked the holoband again. No new contracts. No formal posted bounty on Hale, yet. But his tag.
L7 high priority mark still sat at the top of the alert panel. Watching, waiting. I dismissed it. One bounty at a time, one contract at a time. Core, Jensen, links in a chain leading towards something larger, something ugly, something with a ghost at its center. Fine. Tomorrow, I'd start tugging harder. For now, Jensen Varr was turned in. The credits were in my account. I was still breathing. And that was enough. For today.
All right, recruits, that's the end of this operation. If you made it this far, congratulations. Most don't. But your mission isn't over yet. As part of your civic duty, and to keep this outfit running, you will now hit the like button. Not later, not when you remember, now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, well, that's desertion. Lock it in, subscribe, and stay in formation so you don't miss the next deployment. This is Mercenary Media, where stories bleed, shadows move, and legends are forged in fire and neon. Dismissed.